Welcome back to the Fundamentals of Object workshop. This is part 2 of the Semantic Mapping Objects lesson. And for a brief refresher on where we left off last time, we are within the Object workshop. We had selected the plus sign to create a new object, and we selected the Semantic Mapping tile. And now we are midway through our semantic mapping object, and we're on the template fields section. So scroll down to template fields, and that's where we'll pick up. The template fields panel is where you map the fields from the semantic mapping template to the fields in the import or registered object. The panel contains the list of fields from each template, organized by the field group that each field is associated with in the semantic mapping template. The first column, if you will, in this section is the label of that field from the template you've selected. The next column lists the column name and data type from the template. The third column lists the field's group, which can be changed when mapping. And the fourth column contains a drop-down with 4 types of mapping options to select from. The first option is to select from one of the derived fields you created in the previous panel. Since we did not create any derived fields, we will not see any of them listed here in the drop-down. The second option is to select from the fields associated with the import or registered object. We can map the template's lab ID field to the import object's lab identifier field. Tabbing to the assessment date field, when date or date time fields are mapped, you'll be prompted to enter the date format that is found in the raw or registered table. Now, before we map this last field, let's take a look at the other 2 options that I mentioned. The third option, which is found by scrolling past the list of import objects fields, is to map to one of the metadata fields associated with an import table, like the data source or data effective date. And finally, the fourth option, found by scrolling past the metadata fields, is to map the label from the template to a derived field you create here in the mapping panel. The derived field functionality here works as it does in the derived field panel. We don't need to utilize either of these options, so we will map patient GFR to PT_GFR. The last option you have in the Template Fields panel is to add a comment by selecting this icon. Once a comment is entered, it'll be displayed below the field information to ensure high visibility to other users. To remove a comment, simply select the comment and delete it. As a best practice, we suggest you make frequent comments while you're mapping. The Published Fields panel lists the fields that were mapped in the previous panel by field group. Aside from presenting a summary of the fields that will be published with this object, here you can alter the ordering of both field groups and fields. To reorder field groups, you'll select the large crossed arrows icon on the right side of the screen. Then you can drag field groups into whatever order you like. And once you're done rearranging the ordering of your fields, we'll select the large checkbox to save that new order. To reorder fields within a field group, you'll select the small crossed arrows icon to the right of the field group name. Then you can drag the fields into whatever order you'd like, and you'll click the little checkbox to save your ordering. After making changes to your order, you can revert to the default field and field group ordering by selecting this icon. How the fields are grouped and arranged here is how they'll be displayed when this semantic mapping object is used to create other objects in the data model. The time you invest in this panel now will be time you save on downstream modeling work. Moving on to the Object Metadata panel, we reviewed this panel in the Registered Objects lesson, so I won't rehash all the details here. But all of the functionality is essentially the same, with the exception of the semantic mapping objects are always assigned to the semantic mapping layer, so something to keep in mind. It's important to keep track of the definitions related to analytic outputs, and for those definitions to be readily available to developers or analytics consumers alike. By providing a central repository for the creation and dissemination of terms related to fields, objects, and measures, the terms functionality helps to address that need. Let's move on to the Terms panel. In Analytics Portal, each measure has a list of associated terms available for the user to review. These terms are generally created as objects are developed and inherited by downstream objects in the modeling process. Objects can be assigned any number of terms, and generally these terms provide definitions of fields associated with objects, or they describe general properties about the object or the concept underlying the object. For example, it might be useful to define GFR for this object. From the Terms panel, you can associate terms that already exist in your Ursa instance with the object. You do this by selecting the desired term from the dropdown. And once you've selected it, the term's definition will display to the right. If a term that you'd like to add to an object does not exist in the dropdown already, you can select the wrench icon, which will take you to the Terms screen in Metadata Manager. And from here, you can add a new term by clicking the plus sign icon. When creating a term, you'll first want to enter a namespace. A namespace is a code that identifies which group within your organization owns this term. Namespaces allow various groups within an organization to have identical terms with different definitions, which is common in large health systems. For example, this code, MTM, indicates that terms within this namespace are owned by the organization's Medication Therapy Management Group. The default namespace is AA, which stands for Application Agnostic, and is used for terms that are universal and not related to a particular group. The namespace Ursa is reserved for terms managed by the Ursa team. If a namespace you need does not exist, you can simply type it in. We can add the namespace TRN for the term that we're creating. The term name is often the name of a field in an object. It can also be a concept relevant to a particular object or measure that's useful for developers or other end users. If the name of a term exactly matches the name of a field, a link between the field and the term is automatically created. Let's add a new term for defining BMI. We can call it outpatient BMI reading. The term definition is just what it sounds like. It's the description of the term. I just copy and pasted this definition into the term definition box. The linked value sets option allows you to link the term you're creating to a value set. When you add a value set to this dropdown, the value set's name will appear in bold text in the term's definition in Analytics portal. Linked terms allows you to link an existing term to the term that you're creating. Any term that's referenced in the definition can be linked using this dropdown. When linked terms are added, the term will appear in bold next to the term's definition in Analytics portal. The field matching option allows you to automate the linking of terms to objects. Here you can specify fields that already exist in the data model or have not yet been created. When the specified fields are included in an object, then the term will be inherited by that object. Term inheritance is a concept worth unpacking for just a moment. It's the process of terms being automatically associated with objects and fields, and it plays out in 3 different scenarios. First, here's how term inheritance works at the object level. Non-field matched terms can be manually assigned to an object in the terms panel. Once a term is associated with an object, manually or linked, the term will be inherited or automatically associated with objects that invoke or use that object downstream in the modeling process. Second, here's how term inheritance works at the field level. At the field level, terms are inherited in 2 scenarios. When a new field is derived in an object, the associated term will be inherited. Also, when a field on an upstream object is published, the associated term will be inherited. We can select the Save icon to save our new term, or if we decided we didn't want to create it after all, we could select the Reverse icon to cancel it. To edit an existing term, click the pencil icon, and from the Edit panel, you can make and save changes. You can also delete the term by selecting the trash can icon. Just remember, if you do delete a term, you will not be able to recover it later. Finally, within the Edit window, you can see an audit log of all of the term's changes. The validation panel is common to most object types and allows for the selection of 2 validation checks to be complete when the object is ETL'd. The first check validates the object has at least 1 row, and the second validates the change in record count for subsequent ETL of the object within its designated percentage, which is set to 20% by default. Moving along to the data review panel, we have reviewed this panel in previous lessons, so you should be familiar with how this one works. Now, what you may notice is that since we have not yet run the ETL to build this table, it is letting us know that the table does not exist. So in order to run the ETL, we need to save this object. And once it brings us back to the object workshop, we will select Run This. And then we'll go ahead and click the lightning bolt, which is going to actually run the ETL. Once it has been run, the object has been built, and it will turn green when it's finished or provide feedback if there are any errors or substantial changes to the data. So now that our object is built, we will open the object and return to the data review panel. And as you can now see, there is now data populated in this table. Now, before reviewing the last couple of panels, it would be useful for us to save our object. So let's go ahead and do that first. Okay, so we're back at our semantic mapping page, and scrolling down to the bottom, the ETL history panel shows you a history of the object's runs or the number of times that the object was refreshed. And the revision history panel provides information on changes made to the object, the user, date, and comment, and most importantly, it allows you to recover and restore previous versions of the object as needed. Lastly, a quick review of the icons at the top of the screen. Starting at the left, you can of course save changes made to the object. And the next icon allows you to clone the semantic mapping object, which creates a duplicate object that can serve as a basis for mapping another similar table. When cloning objects in Ursa Health, everything about the cloned object is identical to the original except for the table name, which is suffixed with a _CL. The next icon is for the data review screen, which you are familiar with. And following that is the debug icon, which allows you to open the debug window to review the SQL and JSON code associated with the object. And last is the archive icon, which you already know about. So that's it for this lesson. Thank you for joining, and I will see you in the next one.